I hope that you enjoy. A quick thank you to the T5 peeps. Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Cat Crab Lobster, DuckMachine, Try Again 95, Astraya the Dreamer, Mezec, Feudic Jarl, Germanchemist, Casper Arnholtz, and Chaos to Must. Thank you very much. Story number 1. The Second Attack of the Dead Men. Written by Some Person 21. When humanity joined the galactic stage, it found a UN-like structure, a galactic union, one in which every spacefaring species had a seat. The problem was, it was about as useless as the UN, only being good for relief efforts, galactic data, and being the galactic political thunderdome. Humanity, when it joined this union, found out it had been one of the unluckiest homeworlds, being surrounded in 3 directions by expansionist empires, all 3 of which began eyeing the resources of humanity enviously. The good news was that humanity had managed to make a business deal with 2 of those expansionist empires, quickly forming an economic bond that war would cause major ripples for both. The bad news was the 3rd empire. Facing towards the galactic center, the FallenAngeI had been the strongest of the 3 empires that surrounded Earth, and they didn't want a business deal. Due to said economic bonds, the FallenAngeI wouldn't risk disrupting and angering the 2 other empires. Otherwise, they would be overwhelmed. That was until someone screwed up something somewhere, and it was chaotic. Now the details of the screw-up aren't important. What is important is that both the smaller empires had to divert their attention somewhere else. Specifically, to the point the FallenAngeI could have invaded without having them intervene on humanity's side. And so, the FallenAngeI invaded. Of course, the invasion force was crippled by the start because who doesn't put defenses on the border of your enemies who's only being held back by your neighbors who have a whole lot more stuff to do? Eventually, the FallenAngeI broke through, and because they don't have something called the Geneva Convention, humanity decided to say, feck it, and just, for this war, ditch those rules, as they weren't going to be invading FallenAngeI space anytime soon. 2 months after the war, an Arctic world that was settled by the Scandinavian Confederacy, Eurasian Union, and Canadians from the United States of North America, which also owns Bermuda Island and Greenland for those wanting a map. The battle had been raging for a week. The human defenders were easily able to hold the dense forests and huge mountain ranges whilst conducting guerrilla war everywhere else. The Cadillac mountain range, named after the car, Canadian and Russian forces held forts on their respective sides, keeping the FallenAngeI away. It was in one particular fort that the story occurs. The Fort Ulyanov, Lenin's actual last name. The Eurasians held. The fort had strong enough shields and armor to make artillery useless, enough guns to make an assault suicide. It was too cold for viruses to spread fast enough, and enough anti-air and anti-orbital capabilities that bombing it was too risky. So the FallenAngeI decided to use chemical weapons, namely a mix of chlorine and mustard gas with a little bit of Agent Orange mixed in. And so, with the wind blowing against the fort, they made the mistake of gassing the primarily Russian-held fort with toxic gas. The Russians, of course, knew this all too well, and as such, for those who couldn't either put on or reach their gas masks, they prepared bayonets. After around 5 minutes since the gassing started, a hymn started ringing out. One of the FallenAngeI translators said to be a song called Sacred War. With that, they thought the soldiers in the fort were mourning and dying, and as such, moved in. It wasn't until they were right up the gas wall that they created did they realize their mistake, as thousands of soldiers charged, yelling their hearts out, with skin melting and bleeding, eyes burnt, and suffering the long-term consequences of Agent Orange. They yelled, the likes of which immediately shattered the morale of the FallenAngeI, who tried to run from the dead men. To say it was a slaughter would be accurate, as the dead men didn't let up. They didn't stop to catch their breath. They didn't slow down. No. They kept charging, stabbing any Felic that fell behind to death with bayonets. It was glorious to watch as the soldiers from the forts surrounding began charging themselves, using the panic and the fear of the dead men to utterly crush the Felic. The charge ended up resulting in the death of some Felic high command who were unlikely at the front lines during the charge. It also dropped Felic morale everywhere, and every soldier began to fear the fallen rising up to exact revenge. The planet wouldn't fall, the invasion repulsed, and the Felic scarred. And as they were forced to make peace under the threat of the two other empires intervening on humanity's side, the propaganda and news machines spewed galaxy-wide headlines of "The dead men charge once more." The second charge took place on August 6, 2215, the official 300th anniversary of the first attack of the dead men. End of story. Story number 2. The humans are fragile, and so are their minds. Written by VulDwiin. I was traveling the galaxy in search of stories to share, maybe make some of my own, and perhaps gain some companions. As a couple cycles went by, I heard of many a tale from a few. Some told me of wars, other artists, or fantastical events that unfolded in front of them. But then I heard a story from the Jarl. It was a summer day, and I was wandering the streets in search of somebody who might have had a story, but no one seemed to have any that piqued my interest. Then I saw the Jarl amongst the crowd, a species renowned for their incredible memory and remarkably long lifespan. I knew this being would have at least one good tale, in vivid detail no less. Approaching it, I asked if it would mind telling me a tale or two. It looked at me, and ever so reluctantly agreed to move ahead with the recounting of its tale. It brought me to its home and sat down on a small object near a small garden filled with a strange vegetation. It was small, petite, and seemed distant. The voice of the rag tore me back into reality. "Are we going to start?" I replied, "Yes, of course." So began the tale from the ancient being. "Have you heard of a species known as humans?" It spoke as it stared at a small vegetation near it. "No, I'm afraid I have not," I replied. The Jarl replied with sadness. "The humans were a small race that existed near the rim of the galaxy. Their bodies were fragile, their bone structure suffering under even the planet's gravity, their body easily punctured or destroyed, and their physiology unable to handle many things. But despite this, they were still eager and ready to join us in the stars. Long ago, I had been assigned to work with the humans on board their ships as a doctor. As I boarded the ship, I saw them scurry about around me, examining me in awe and amazement. I politely shooed them away and went to my post on the ship. That's when I met my fellow doctor by the name of Lbry. He was small, even by human standards, and was humorous. Joking around, he was the ship's goofball, as the human crewmates described him. We grew close, and as the years passed in service of the human ships, I saw wondrous things that the humans claimed to be mundane. Then, as we all parted our ways after the ship was decommissioned, I remained in contact with Lbry, chatting and visiting every now and again. Then one visit, Lbry behaved almost strangely, forgetting my name, not remembering where items were, but he seemed to remain the goofball he was, and shrugged it off. Then, on another visit, he seemed to blank out at random times and stare off into empty space. He forgot a lot about me and so much else, strangely, in so little time. In the moments of calm and thinking moments, he seemed to be scared. but his fear seemed to wither away when he saw me. But in that instant I left his sight, he would grow wary and fearful. He spoke very little during my time near him, and when he did, he spoke of forgetting and some strange disease. I barely understood him, but he looked at me, hoping I knew what he was saying. I left where he was staying at with a worry. Then a year later, I found him in frantic and constant state of panic, only followed by him simply staring away into nothingness. He hardly acknowledged me, and did not even flinch as I left him. He was there, but his mind appeared distant and not present. Years later, I came back to see if things had improved. He was laying motionless, still and emotionless. But this time, I stayed longer and tried talking to the man. And suddenly, to one of my questions, he replied, "No, not that." I tried to get him to speak again. Nothing. He returned to his dead state. I left again and prayed that he would recover. The fourth visit terrified me. The man that I had known dear forgot what felt like everything. He didn't seem scared, just stared off and did nothing. Not even a single thing changed about him. He was just motionless. I left the instant I saw this, but my friend had become. Years later, when I heard that he was dying, I rushed to the hospital they kept him at. I entered the room and was only met by an old man laying in a bed. The only sounds that were in that room were the hospital equipment and the clock that lay in the room. I stayed in his room for days, accompanying my friend, and as the hours passed, I grew less and less hopeful, till a voice came from the shell of a man. "Hello, old friend." He smiled for the first time in years. He spoke again. "Why so glum?" I told him everything, but he seemed confused, forgetting. "What are you talking about?" "We got a patient to treat, remember?" I said nothing, but I gave a small nod. "We'll do it later, won't we?" I nodded again. His heartbeat slowed with each word he uttered. "You know, I just remembered the funniest thing. The monitors started to beat faster. There is a flower dated to birth called Forget-Me-Not." He chuckled as the monitor's beeping sped up. "Rather funny." "It is, friend, it is." Then the monitor's beep stopped entirely, as the body of the man I knew went cold. The Urog was somber and looked at the blue flowers growing nearby it, and looked at me. I have other stories, but I'm afraid that it's just a burning memory. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed